Dun, dun, dun. Hello, everyone, and welcome to StartOut's Fundraising in the Time Aftermath of COVID-19. My name is Patrick Driscoll, and I am the Programming Board Chair for StartOut's Fundraising and VC Group. And I'm fortunate enough today to intro you to these amazing folks who will be taking the lead in this event. Alex, Fayette, Aike, Ho, and Mike Sullivan. Before we get into the actual event, I did want to talk a little bit about StartOut for those that don't know. And here we go. So the mission and direction of StartOut, it's essentially to increase the number and diversity and impact of members of the LGBTQ plus community, specifically via entrepreneurship, and additionally to amplify their stories and drive the economic empowerment of our community in general. So if you are not already a member of StartOut and you are a founder, you're thinking about starting a company, you're an investor, you are an ecosystem builder in terms of entrepreneurship, feel free to check out startout.org, spread the message. It's a really fantastic organization. I love being a part of it. And now that's enough about StartOut. Now for the meat and potatoes, why we're all here, I'd like to introduce, actually, before I get into that, I do want to talk about the logistics of this for the Q&A at the end of this event. At the bottom of your screens, you will see a Q&A, or the top of your screens, depending on the version, a Q&A button. Feel free to, throughout the kind of webinar, enter your questions there. At the end, we've allotted 10 to 15 minutes for questions from the audience. I'll run through those and I'll ask them of our panelists. So make sure you ask questions there, not in the chat function. However, if you would like to chat with other members or other participants in the webinar, feel free to do so in the chat function. But remember, I won't take questions from the chat. Q&A. And with that, I'll pass it off to Mike Sullivan. He is partner at Orrick, Herrington, and Sutcliffe, and I'll let him discuss his background, and he'll intro the other two folks as well.
Thank you, Patrick. Much appreciated. We'll try to keep the Orrick commercial really short. I'm a partner at Orrick, Herrington, and Sutcliffe. I'm also chair of the board of advisors at StartOut. At Orrick, I head up the corporate group in our San Francisco office, and I specialize in startup and venture capital work. Over the years, I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of formations and financings, and represent companies and investors. Here you can see a little bit of a commercial for the firm, the number of clients we have, 2,700 technology companies worldwide, some of our rankings and some of our awards. We know startups and we know venture capital really well, which is why I'm happy to have a rock star panel here with Alex Fayette and Aike Ho at Acme Capital. I know both Alex and Aike well. They are savvy investors in startups, and we've got a great show for you over the next hour. We are going to save some time at the end for questions. So as Patrick said, please use the chat function to submit them as we're going through our questions. I'm going to let Alex and Aike say a little bit about themselves before we get into the meat of the panel. So at this point, Alex and Aike, hand it over to you for talk about yourselves a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And we'll keep this part rather brief. So Aike and I are both principals here at Acme Capital. Acme Capital is an early stage venture firm. I joined the team back in 2015 and have been investing with them in all sorts of amazing companies. You can see some of our portfolio over here on the right. We love leading rounds like Series A's. Frequently we have 850 million under management. I got into this profession a little bit by accident, but started off my career in investment banking at JP Morgan, doing tech investment banking, and through networks and connections, as people frequently do, got introduced to the folks over at Acme and fell in love, and after a long courting process, became a venture capitalist, and years later, couldn't imagine doing anything else. Aike, want to quickly intro yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Alex. I joined the team in, 2016, 2017. It feels like COVID has added 3 years to that. So let's call it a while. And had a bit more of a windy path to venture. Never thought I'd actually ended up on this side of the table. I started on the other side of the table, starting companies. I started 3 companies before doing a corporate detour. Was at the New York Stock Exchange, building out their tech business there. That was at the height of the high frequency trading era, and then was at JP Morgan also for a couple years, where I built out cross asset electronic trading desk there, and Chase Pay. So have been building for most of my career, and around the time that I was launching Chase Pay, had a big health thing, and that was a life-changing experience, and that it forced me to kind of think about what I wanted to do. Ended up on the other side of the table as a venture investor, and now spend a lot of time in healthcare.
Great. Thanks, you two. So I know the 3 of us have done lots of panels like this, and I will bet the folks watching on the Zoom have seen lots of panels like this. So we thought we would give it a twist and sort of focus on what's new. And we've been in the pandemic for what, almost a year now, and it doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon. So I think we're going to be dealing with pandemic-like situations this year, 2021. So let's talk about what's different about investing in the pandemic. So I want to ask, how has COVID-19 affected your connections and relationships and process with entrepreneurs, starting with the funnel from like the first email that comes in over the transom to kind of closing around? How is it different now as opposed to 2019?
Yeah, it's I can start here. It definitely was a bigger shock at the beginning of the crisis. I think there was a lot more uncertainty, right, about what was going on, and I think we all may remember Sequoia putting out their their second black swan letter of being batten down the hatches, and we love them, and they're really smart folks. They were completely wrong with that, right? There was a moment of everyone holding their breath, and then things got back to business pretty quickly. One of the things that did change for us, though, obviously, was not having a lot of maybe what you would consider social time with founders. And this is important in so many ways. And there's a statistic I love to share, and I've said it so many times, I think, which is the average marriage duration in the United States is something like 8.25 years, 8.5 years. It's something like that. God bless divorce. But it's much shorter than people think it is. And if you look at the time it takes a really successful company to go from Series A all the way to being public, for instance, unless you get really lucky, it's a long journey. One of our colleagues is just on the board of a company. He was on the board of that Aike for how long? It was 14 years, 15 years or something.
Oh my God, yeah, that's true. 14 years.
Huge amount of time to the exit. We're friends with the Hartzes over at Eventbrite. That's a husband and wife team. So their marriage survived, building a company. That was 13 years from founding the company to going public. And so the social dynamic of not just doing this diligence and learning about the vision and the team and whatever, but that reality that, hey, if we're actually going to invest in you and join your board and become partners, and if we have any chance of success, we're going to be in this personal relationship for longer than the average duration of a marriage in the US. And so then I sort of flip it back, saying, how would you try to find a spouse, during COVID, when you can't, go out and have dinner and drinks and hang out in the park and, do activities? There's a little bit of that's been lost, of building that rapport, seeing if there's that spark, and can you build the trust with the people. The first investment we actually did post COVID was one that I sort of led for us, and I didn't physically meet the founder until delivering the term sheet to him and shake his hand. Yeah, And it was sort of this crazy moment of, oh, like we finally get to meet, and like, you know, here's X million dollars. So that's a little bizarre. And I think it stresses us all out to say, how can we build those connections better virtually?
Yeah. I think thinking about it from a tactical level I'm going to start with us as investors and then the folks in the audience as entrepreneurs. So much of an entrepreneur's ability to fundraise, I think it's around your network and who you know and who you're friendly with, especially on the venture side. And Alex and I are really lucky in that we've been doing this for a number of years now, and we have our existing network. If you are a venture investor who's just starting out right now, or you're new in tech in the middle of the pandemic, you don't have those existing relationships. And you know, we're not going into conferences or events. So most of our deal flow is coming through friends, either founders or other VCs who know us really well. And we're really lucky in that we have great inbound based on those existing relationships. But if you're new to the game, you kind of have to go down the cold outbound email route, you know, and not really not be able to rely on existing relationships. On the other end, I think if you think about it from a founder's perspective, if you don't have those connections, you have to rely on cold emailing VCs instead of, you know, pinging your friend who you've known for 3 years and have gone drinks every quarter. And that just makes it harder, because I think when you are friends with someone, typically people will at least take a look, will take an intro meeting, versus when there's no existing relationship at all. You know, like we get tons of inbound emails, so much so that we can't even sort through them. So when we're prioritizing which companies we take a look and take an intro meeting, typically it's because there's a warm intro there, because Mike introduced us to someone, or because Patrick knows someone and says like, hey, this is sort of up in your alley. So as you think about navigating fundraising, relying on the network that you have and figuring out creative ways in which you can expand your network during this time, because I think we're going to be in it for a while. I've been really fortunate in that some of my friends have organized things like virtual Among Us games or virtual poker games, and those types of events sort of broad on your horizon and being able to meet other founders or other investors. But I think there's something to be said. You know, we are going to be in this mode of living for probably another 6 to 9 months, if not more. Got to get out there and socialize. This is very much so a relationship driven game. And then once you get into the meetings themselves with investors, I think pitching in person is really different than pitching through Zoom, through virtual means, whether it's Google Hangout or any other web conference platforms. It's much easier for the people on the other side to check out. It's easy to check our phones or emails. It's easy to get distracted when you're in the confines of your home and you have all of your devices right next to you. So I think as a founder, it's that much more important to manage energy in the middle of those meetings. Make sure that you are coming in with high energy, you're directly interacting with people, calling out people's comments, coming back to it. Because in the end of the day, even if you have a really cool business, but people aren't paying attention, that's not going to lead to the second meeting. That's not going to lead to the diligence calls. So those are just certain things that I've picked up on now, almost a year into this. And that's something that we're working on too. We're constantly reminding each other. It's like, hey, when we're back to back, yesterday we had 3 partnership meetings back to back in our investment committee. We were basically in meetings from 8 a.m. to call it 5 p.m. with no break in between. And the reality of that, it's like the human attention span is really short. So what can you do as a founder to make sure that people remember you and have a great impression of you?
I'm going to chime in with another tip, which is make sure that the nuts and bolts of the Zoom or Google Meets or whatever it is are working. I was actually pitching a client last month with a colleague, and as we got started, I could see that in his home office, the sun was shining from a window, and it was hitting one side of his face. So that side of his face was completely glared, and the other side of his face was completely dark. And he looked like a character from a Marvel, movie or comic book. And I wanted to just, send him a text saying, get out of the sun. So the takeaway there is just make sure your audio video is well suited to your Zoom. Staying on the pandemic theme, I have noticed in my client base that there are some companies that actually, obviously a lot of companies were hit hard by the pandemic and their business models just don't work as well or sometimes at all in the COVID-19 era, but others have actually gotten a lift. So talk about maybe from your portfolio companies, some examples of the pluses and minuses. And are there maybe, companies that or entrepreneurs that have a business model that actually gets a lift from distance and work from home actually it should be highlighted?
Yeah, no, I think we saw both sides of the coin. And we have, if you jumped back to that page of logos or go on our website and see, we have a pretty diverse set of companies, everything from, rockets and quantum computers to zit cream that gets mailed to you and stuff like that. We saw a number of businesses immediately struggle right out of the gate and cause a lot of uncertainty. And you probably wouldn't be surprised what types of businesses those were. The hardest hit out of the gates were the ones with brick and mortar, dependency. That uncertainty threw everyone for a loop. Also, I think the PPP process, which Mike, I'm sure you probably with many of your clients were trying to navigate that, a year ago. There was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of it actually coming down to unclear communication. But there was probably a month and a half long period where we were running around like chickens with our heads cut off, trying to make heads or tails of this with our founders to say, like, okay, do we take this or not? What sort of cuts do we have to make in order to survive, either on spend or in some cases, unfortunately letting people on the teams go. Those were probably the most negatively adverse effects. There were some others with more of the B2B categories where they were dependent on securing deals with maybe a large corporate. And those deals went on ice for many companies for months. For that same uncertainty, there really wasn't anything fundamental that changed. It was just uncertainty. We've seen almost all of that warm back up again on the negative side. So they were really temporary blips. But I think on the positive blips, and I can hand this off to Aike, is around, first of all, healthcare companies, anyone in digital health. But also, a lot of the e-commerce, universe that was being built for, hey, never show up to a store, browse online, hit a button and have it, show up, 3 days later, thanks Amazon for raising the bar for everyone to force companies to be able to do that. But Aike, do you want to hit maybe on some of the more, positive developments?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think about it in the micro and the macro, and Alex touched a lot on the micro side. The thing I would add there is obviously healthcare, you're seeing an acceleration of adoption in digital health that I thought was going to take another 5 years. People are now, my UCSF appointment is now through a Zoom call instead of going in person, and I can go to a local lab to do my blood draw instead of going in and all the way to the hospital. So there are a lot of really positive tailwinds from this. And I think it's certainly forcing at least the healthcare ecosystem in the US to rethink a lot of reimbursement policies. So telemedicine is reimbursed at parity right now with in-person visits. It's thinking through a lot of like what happens in between visits, especially since the visits are not happening themselves. So I think there's a lot of really interesting things that are going to happen in healthcare in the next couple of years. And you're also seeing investors react accordingly in that the dollar amount that VCs are putting into digital health, even folks who never touched digital health before COVID, are now investing in digital health. And we've been in the game for a long time now, so it's been interesting to see that.
The game here being digital health. We should point out
Oh yeah, digital health, very
health,
different than say like
2050.
biotech. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
The macro stuff is, I think, what is befuddling and exciting at the same time. So the macro trends here being SPACs and retail traders, and that actually enabling a lot of companies that are mature to have an exit maybe earlier than what they would have seen before. So it's not only impacting certain verticals of companies, but also where are you in the life cycle of maturity as a startup? So, we have a lot of our portfolio companies that are getting solicited by SPACs who are trying to find targets for a reverse merger. We are seeing companies across the industry that are going out through SPAC or even IPO and performing beyond their wildest dreams, based on how market is performing, as well as retail traders going and participating. And a lot of it is driven because people are home. Like, this is a form of entertainment now, and there's nowhere else that they're really parking their money. So that will continue to be the biggest question in my mind, of whether or not that holds post shelter in place, and once we get back to normal, whatever that means. But certainly great tailwinds for a number of verticals that we invest in, and we'll see what happens on the exit side of things.
Yeah, I think there was one point in there that Aike mentioned really briefly, but I think is super salient. We haven't seen a ton of like brand new things appear because of COVID. The pandemic, like, wow, there's this whole business model that was just never going to work, but all of a sudden it's the best thing since sliced bread. A lot of what we've seen, when she said, oh, we didn't think this was going to happen for 5 years, was that there were some big trends and big shifts going on already. They were going to happen one way or the other. It was inevitable. This accelerated the things that were already happening. From our perspective, we haven't seen that much. It was like, wow, this thing now works that was completely broken before. And that's a nuance sometimes I think that gets missed with all the excitement that's going on for the positive developments.
Yeah, I've got two of my more active clients were definitely uplifted by the pandemic. One is a company called Tempo, which makes home exercise hardware and software. It's sort of AI enabled, so you can exercise at home and get kind of coaching from real people, and also from sort of AI enabled robots. And they've just seen their I mean, they're just on a tear as a result of people.
But they were doing great beforehand too, right? Like, they were already doing great, and this just gave them, nitro.
Exactly. Another, and this will segue into the next topic. Another client of mine, Matterport, which is a 3D camera company, which then leads to 3-dimensional images of interiors, which go up into the cloud. Imagine in the old days, if you were going to buy a house, you would attend, go to open houses on a Sunday, or you'd get your real estate agent to show you on a weekday and walk into houses and walk around. Well, that can't happen so easily anymore. So with Matterport, you can digitally, with your phone or your laptop, you can walk around the house and walk into kitchens and check out the bathrooms. And they actually just yesterday announced a SPAC that valued them at either $3 billion or $3.8 billion, depending on the day. And that was a company that just really got supercharged by the pandemic.
Yeah, and in that case, it was different, right? It was a premium product that now is like essential, right? Exactly. The only way to show a home is like with that.
Exactly, and there are many other use cases which they wouldn't have gotten the $4 billion valuation if it was just home purchases. But I mean, they're a good example of the SPAC phenomenon. And for those, I'm sure many of the folks watching know what a SPAC is, but just for those that don't, a SPAC stands for Special Purpose Acquisition Company. It's a company that goes out and raises money in a public offering, in an IPO with the SEC. And it's a total blind pool. There's no business behind the SPAC. It's just generally a well-regarded investor or set of investors who raise a bunch of money, and they tell the world, they tell their investors, we're going to go acquire a company with the money you give us. And usually, if there's a feature where if the investor doesn't like the company, they can redeem out, they can get their money back. And then once the company raises X hundreds of millions of dollars, they then go out and try to find a business that's a good fit. And when they do, there's a merger of the business with the SPAC. So the SPAC, which was a shell company with a lot of money before the transaction, ends up with a business. The business ends up with a lot of cash because the SPAC had the cash. And then usually there's also a private placement referred to as a PIPE that happens at the same time that infuses even more cash into the business. So the businesses get a ton of cash. And they, in my experience, I'm finding that companies that really never could have done an IPO in the past are able to go public through these SPACs at a much earlier stage and at a much higher valuation than they could have in the IPO world. And this is a phenomenon of the last year. The SPACs that we saw in the old days were viewed with suspicion, and if you were involved with like a reverse merger or a SPAC, you were a company that couldn't raise money any other way. Now we're seeing really good companies go public through SPACs. So I guess my question for the two of you is, what do you think of this phenomenon? Do you think it's here to stay, and how is it going to change the ecosystem that entrepreneurs and investors are working in?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a really interesting front row seat to this. As Ike had mentioned, lots of our portfolio companies are getting solicited, but we've now done 2 SPACs out of our portfolio for things where we've had leading board positions. One of those was for DraftKings, which that was really, if you think about this new wave of SPACs, that was like SPAC number 2. SPAC number 1 was Virgin Galactic with Chamath. Chamath taking them public. And then it was DraftKings. And so we had an amazing front row seat to that, because that was announced, keep me honest here, I think it was like end of 2019, and then it closed, early 2020. And then about a week and a half ago, we announced that one of our portfolio companies that we led the Series A of, called Astra, which builds rockets to launch small satellites into orbit, they are going public via a reverse merger with the SPAC. And what's fascinating about that in particular is how quickly the market has evolved from even a year ago. And Mike, I'm sure as you're talking to your clients, you're also seeing how some of this in the market, it's moving around real time, from both, terms, appetite, the number of players out there. It's kind of overwhelming. But leveling up for a second, what I think SPACs are fundamentally doing are solving for a failure in the growth end of the venture market. And this isn't a new failure. This is something that we've actually been talking about and gossiping about and whatever for years and years and years. The form just changes over time. The form prior to SPACs, if we jump back a year and a half or 2 years, you couldn't go a day without hearing about SoftBank Vision Fund throwing just boatloads of money at companies. At the same time, you were just hearing about direct listings left and right, Spotify going public without using banks to do a traditional IPO process. These were all trying to fix what were ultimately some issues in the growth market, which is, why is all of this upside going to the private markets? Why are the public market players getting excluded from this? Some of them are trying to jump into the venture game and push earlier and earlier and earlier to try to get that. So this was really, I think, the next evolution. Now, I do think we're in a little bit of a bubble of it. The bubble being, there's a lot of folks out there who have no idea what they're doing, spinning up SPACs and going to chase companies. We're seeing it every day with a huge quality divide in the quality of the SPAC sponsor. Some of these are really sophisticated operators and investors, and some of them are people who are jumping on the bandwagon. And I think the bandwagon folks may not end, fantastically for them at the end of the day. The musical chairs will run out. For the high quality sponsors going after the high quality companies, I think this is going to be here to stay. This is a really, really attractive alternative for companies to get public and get a lot of money really efficiently. And it's also a really great returns vehicle for the folks who are investing in those SPACs. So I think there's going to be a bunch of death. And there's also going to be a lot of success. And at the end of the day, it's going to be more normal, maybe, than Mike, what you talked about, that trepidation that was always on people's mind, like a SPAC, like, ooh, that's kind of scary. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think my big question in this market is, will there be a winner take all phenomenon as money in the market eventually retracts, right? We talked a little bit about retail traders putting money into the public markets, and even my 22-year-old brother is, buying
GameStop.
No, he didn't participate in the GameStop, but he's buying SPACs left and right, and a lot of it is based on rumor of who's merging with who, etc. But you have a lot of people with money and time in their hands, and that inflates the market a little bit. I think, to Alex's point, the sophisticated investors are going to do just fine. They're very savvy in targeting high quality companies. The ones who are less sophisticated, and in the end of the day, we're gonna see what their track record looks like. And when there's just not as much money in the market, if there's a correction that happens, maybe as people go back to work and don't spend as much time on Robinhood or day trading, I think you'll see definitely a retraction in the market.
Got it. All right. I'm going to segue over to a question. I mean, this is StartOut after all. So yep. I always done a few of these. I like to ask panelists, being your authentic self. If you're an entrepreneur and you're pitching to an investor, and you don't, maybe you know the investor well, maybe you don't know the investor well. Any advice about how transparent to be with the investor about your LGBT status? Is it, in 2021, is all of that behind us? Is it always okay to be your authentic self in a meeting with a VC, or not? What do you think?
It's an interesting question, because I think it's one that we keep asking every year. Like this, it's a great question, Mike. It's also not a new one, right? This is one that we're always doing that litmus test. And I don't think there's always like the perfect answer for this, right? And as founders, you're having to navigate a really, really tricky tightrope between, again, feeling like your authentic self and being comfortable, but also there's a power dynamic in there, especially when you're first meeting investors, where you want them to give you money and you're like, wait, should I change something about what I'm doing or not in order to win that money? Going back to my comments earlier about marriage and duration, duration of relationship. There is a lot of upside if you take that lens to being as authentic as possible in these discussions, because let's play out an example here. Let's say you try to hide the fact or whatever that you weren't straight, and you are developing a relationship with an investor. You like them, they like you, they invest. You are now going to be in more or less a therapeutic relationship with this person who's on your board of directors for the next decade. And a discussion that's going to have to happen at some point here is like, oh, hey, by the way, my spouse is a man, or my spouse is a woman, or I'm bi, or I'm trans, or whatever it is. And you've actually caused a new coming out stress structure that is actually harder, I think, than being authentic up front, because the cat's out of the bag. There's no extra pretense in there, versus, oh God, I've now formed a relationship with someone, a committed long-term relationship with someone that I have to, after the fact, reveal something. it's not going to be good for you. There's no part of that that's going to be good for you, even if the other person is an incredibly accepting, open-minded investor partner for you. You're going to be stressed out in a way that you could nip in the bud right off the bat. So I strongly encourage people to just be your authentic self. Most investors really are pretty open-minded these days, I think.
Yeah, to that point, I think I don't even think about it as like you're revealing or you're coming out. It's just what's your life and what's normal. It's like I'd be hard pressed to find an investor who would react negatively. And if they do react negatively to someone being authentic to who they are, that's for sure not someone you want to work with.
Yeah.
And I think as a founder, you're navigating it with potential investors, but there's also so much emphasis now in D&I, diversity and inclusion, within organizations. So it's like you're not only navigating that on the investor side, but also how do you build the right culture in your company? And I think if you treat this as if it's normal, I mean, maybe Alex and I are very spoiled in that, like, we have an amazing workplace that tolerates us. And
you're what, three
personalities.
4/8
Yeah,
LGBT? What's your percentage?
That's right. I mean, there was a period of time we had 6 investors on the team, and so Aike and I, a third of the team was queer. We just added two more, one of which is also a gay man, and we're like, okay, we're up to 3 out of 8.
3 out of 8.
Not to keep score, but we're always like, okay, are we like the queerest venture firm by ratio of investors? But you don't need investors that are that diverse on the sexual orientation or identity spectrum to do that. I think a lot of the professional VCs out there, they really get it. I think most of them actually do understand the importance more and more of diversity across gender, across race, across sexual identity and orientation. I would say, and I mean, curious, like, if you agree or disagree with me here, I think it's actually a trickier discussion if we're talking about angel investors who are individuals. I think there's a bigger divide between trying to raise money from individuals versus folks who are, professional investors in an organization that is more or less, in today's culture, we have to talk about it. It's essential that we do so we win. There's a lot of, bigoted individuals out there, though, who, when they operate in their own little wheelhouse, they can be more, binary to the negative.
Yeah,
I think that's right, because I think the institutional investors, the VCs, have reputations, and I think these days, if you develop a reputation for bigotry or homophobia, it's a big negative. But I just don't think I don't see that with
it's like people forget it's still kind of a cottage industry. Like, we all kind of know each other. Everyone is 1 degree removed from everyone else. You are very, very sensitive to your reputation being tarnished in any way, shape, or form. So that's a great point.
And there are so many LGBT investors out there. I used to say I needed only one hand to count all the gay VCs, LGBT VCs in the country, and now even my hands and toes aren't enough.
Yeah,
you need hands, toes.
Yeah. You need a team of hands and toes.
All right, and I want to remind everyone who's watching, if while we're talking, if you have a question, we're going to have in 5 or 7 minutes, we're going to switch over to questions. So type out your questions for Aike and Alex, and we'll hit those in a little bit. One fun question in panels like this is to talk about common mistakes. What are some either war stories or just really common mistakes that entrepreneurs make in talking to or outreach to VCs? So things to avoid. What comes to mind?
Aike, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I'll start with a couple. Always find a warm intro. Again, most venture firms get such an influx of inbound interest or founders that the way that we sort through the noise is, who do we know, who do we trust, and who are they recommending we talk to? So as much as you can, do the warm intros and, go on LinkedIn, see who do you have in overlap in terms of connections, Facebook, etc. Like, I think there are ways that you could figure out if there's a first or second degree connection there. That's one of the biggest ones in terms of just getting a conversation. I think the other thing that at least I recommend to all of my friends who are raising money is going after investors who are the right stage fit and the right thesis vertical fit, right? Because it could be easy to assume that all investors are the same, but we play in a lot of different areas. Alex and I invest primarily in Series A's and B's. Sometimes a lot of the companies that come in are too early for us in that we want to see product market fit and we're not there yet. Or sometimes someone's coming in and they're raising a $40-50 million Series C round, and that's way too big. So you can get a lot of information online in terms of where the company, where the firm focuses on in terms of stage, and then the verticals also matters a lot, right? So if you're building a healthcare company or a space company or a enterprise SaaS company, who are the investors who are active, who've done, if you think about companies that are adjacent to yours or competitive to yours, who are the investors who've invested in those companies in the last 2 years? So I think that's always do your homework, because then you're not spending, 50 conversations and 30 of them are not with investors that are a good fit for you. So you're starting with a higher quality fit at the top of your funnel to begin with. And I think when you have that first conversation with the investors, ask them, what's your average check size? What stage do you typically play in? What do you look for in companies that you invest in? So getting as much information that you can't get online from that first conversation, I think, is important. It's a two directional thing, right? They're trying to figure out if your company is a good fit for them, and you're trying to figure out if they're the right VC for you. Building relationships is always an important one, and other VCs might under-index or over-index on this, but it's such a long-term relationship that, like, I want to like this person. I want to be able to get a beer with this person, or a scotch or whiskey, whatever your poison is, and enjoy it. And again, it's a little harder to do that now, to find out if there's that match in this pandemic world, because you can't just go to dinner or get a coffee or whatever, but maybe you can do a distance walk or a distance park hang. Or maybe you just do a Zoom where you don't talk about work at all. I think those things actually make a difference. Alex, am I missing anything?
No, I was gonna say, I also have some fun war stories in here. If we want a silly and funny one that's just aimed right at this audience, don't go into a physical pitch meeting with your Grindr notifications turned audio on. The best way to out yourself to another gay, another gay individual when they're on the other side of the table is to have a certain ding go off.
Did you match with that person?
I'm like, I've heard this sound before.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, right. And it was that's just a funny war story. Here's a couple of one. This is an obvious mistake that I think people make over and over again. And I don't know why, so I'll say the correction again. Never talk to VCs and say you just need to raise money once and then we'll be profitable and it's all going to be great from there. You can probably count on one hand the number of really successful companies that have pulled that off. All of the rest need more money. It makes you look really out of touch. I see Mike nodding along because he's probably either heard this a bunch or had to advise folks on it. It makes you look like you have no idea what you're doing. It's okay if you don't know what you're doing.
And one other, never say you don't have any competition.
That's
another,
there's very few companies that actually pull that off. But maybe at the more macro level, some mistakes that happen. This one's going to sound really hard, but it's actually much easier than you think, and it touches into the point that Aike made where I'm trying to build the relationships. Don't raise money don't go to raise money when you need to raise money.
Yep.
It always messes up what your initial relationship building is going to be when it's starting off with an ask where, hey, nice to meet you. Can you give me money now? Obviously I'm oversimplifying, but try to build relationships with investors when you say, hey, I'm not raising money right now. I'm going to be going out to raise my Series A in 9 months or something. I'd love to start, introducing you to what we're doing, and let's just have a discussion. Until then, you are going to catch so much more interest that way than being the, hey, I'm raising money, can you fund me in the next month? It's huge. It sounds hard. It's so much easier to do than you could possibly imagine. And Mike, I see you bobbing along there too, because you've seen it too, I think.
I just thought of a question, and this is unfair of me to do this to you two, but I'm gonna ask a really hard question and ask you to answer it really quickly, because we're gonna go to questions in about 3 minutes.
Okay.
So a lot of folks, I would imagine, watching the Zoom aren't ready for venture capital yet. They're not ready for VCs, and they need to raise money from angels. So what advice do you give to somebody who isn't at a stage ready to talk to you guys? They need to raise money from angels. Maybe they don't have the Rolodex that you do. What's some advice for an entrepreneur in that situation?
So many people are focused on like metrics and like, I don't have enough traction yet. I'm gonna guess here that we're gonna get some questions in this Q&A around how do I navigate things where my traction isn't quite there. The single most important skill for fundraising, and this becomes even more important when you're at that end of the spectrum, Mike, is, are you a good storyteller or not? And have you crafted a really compelling story that you don't, and we see this mistake all the time, that founders lose the forest just because they're focused on these trees. And at those early stages, your job is to paint a compelling, really like nuanced vision of what the future is going to be like and how you're going to make that happen and get there. When you're trying to convince angels, that's a lot of time what they're betting on. They're betting on this story and you as a person. And the best angels know that if you're a great storyteller as a founder, you're going to be good at a lot of other things that are critical to success. You're going to be able to raise a lot more money in the future because you're going to be able to keep telling this compelling story. You're going to be able to hire the best people, which is critical. I mean, maybe the most important skill, for building a great company. And third, you're going to be able to win business. You're going to be able to either, convince consumers to try out your stuff, or you're going to be able to get a business customer to convert because you're great at storytelling. And that is the most important advice I could ever give founders, is perfect your story.
All right. Aike, anything to add?
I would add that there's also so much money in venture now that there are actually institutional investors that act like angels, pre-seed investors. These people are the type of people who will put in anywhere between $100K to $1 million into a founder with a deck. Like, you don't even need to have your co-founders in place or your team in place or even any kind of product in place. Like, it's just a belief. Having a list of those pre-seed investors to go to is also, I think, a great alternative or supplement to raising from angels.
Go check out Angel List. There's so much stuff. There's so many people on there, and they fund so many companies. You should be stalking Angel List like crazy.
And I actually think, going back to the SPAC topic we talked about a moment ago, I think that's going to fuel more angel investing because there's so much money going through these SPACs. Once the lockups come off, you're going to see a lot of people who will have the capacity to be angel investors that never had the capacity before.
Do you know what? Both that, and just to plug AngelList again, because they built some great stuff. SPACs are disrupting the later stage end of the market, which, as Mike so correctly points out, has a trickle down effect through everything else. Rolling funds, which are totally a brand new thing of the last year, really coming out of AngelList, is a really interesting way for a lot of these newer investors to set up small funds around themselves to go after, most of the time, angel investments in a more institutional way. And so I think that's opening up a lot of opportunity and capital for those folks who maybe don't have much traction yet.
All right, well, I'm going to keep the trains running on time here, and we've got, let's take some time for some questions. Patrick, do you want to, I know we've seen some come through the chat. Do you want to pick a question or two or three for these folks?
Absolutely. I just made sure all of my dating app notifications were on silent, so don't worry about that. Great. So I like this question. You kind of touched on it, but I think it's good to reiterate. This is from John Paul. When is the right time to start engaging and building relationships with investors? What's the best way to respect their space without being aloof?
Yeah. So again, when you don't need to raise, it's what you always want to be when you're not needing to raise yet. Don't spam the investors. We totally miss things, so please re-ping us. But if you're hitting us up and we haven't gotten back to you in 2 days, and you're hitting us up 3 times in a week, that's not doing you favors by any means. Put on some cadence. If you want to, this is part of the benefit of engaging before you need it. If we miss it, you can reach back out in a month, and it shouldn't change much for you. And we'll get it that time if we missed it the first time.
I often tell my clients to explicitly tell the investor that you're not raising. So this isn't, I don't want to talk to you because I'm raising money. I want to build a relationships with someone that I respect and who's I know invests in the space, and maybe down the road will be a good fit.
Also VCs respond to FOMO really, really, really well.
Exactly.
If you set it up, it's hey, I'm not raising yet, but I want to kind of give you a preview so you can get a first look at what we're doing. You're going to get so many more email opens than you've ever realized. I promise.
To continue the dating analog here, I don't think anyone ever feels good when it feels like they're getting spam with the same message. It's you definitely specialize what you're saying. Show that you've actually looked at what the person is most interested in, and craft your outgoing message that way. That will increase your likelihood of a response than just the standard, hey, not raising, would love to connect. Don't make it sound like a LinkedIn message.
Not agree more with that. So here is one from an anonymous attendee. So it kind of gets beyond the capital part of VC. So if an investor agrees to invest, should and how I start the discussion about how the investor can get more involved beyond the capital? What are expectations that can be set for introductions, things like that?
I think typically when you're talking to an investor for the first time, they'll give you a flavor of how hands-on they want to be. We always put in our intro with founders that we typically take board seats and we get pretty involved. And our thing is we like to be the first call when things are going well or things are going badly and there's an emergency. We want to be the first call. Not everyone's like that. So hopefully they'll give you a preview of what that looks like from the intro call, but you can also ask. And dating, again, this is a two-way directional thing. Pay attention to how quickly are they responding to your emails or your texts or your calls. How engaged are you when you go to them with certain things? So you don't want to wait until when you're funding or they're signing something to answer the question of what are they going to be like as a partner, right? And there are certain, and also it's a good question of what do you want? There are certain founders, especially the ones where this is their second, third, or fourth company, where they don't want investors involved. They just want to do their thing. Okay, Mr. Investor, I've done this before. I'm just gonna, I'll call you if I need help, but for the most part, I got it. And then there are certain investors who want, certain founders who want to be a little bit more helped and supported by their investors. So knowing what you want will help you pay attention to the folks who you think are going to be good partners with you.
Absolutely. Here is another question that I hear all the time. Is there a science behind getting past the analyst that maybe doesn't see the USP or potential?
So, oh God. So not science, man, there's a lot of things you can do to stack the deck in your favor. First of all, don't poo-poo the fact that your first meeting is with them. they have so much more influence inside the decision making than you realize. And if you quickly try to scoot around them, you've just lost like an advocate, inside the belly of the beast. So treat them well, first and foremost. A big one that isn't a piece of advice that isn't always obvious is when you're looking at your deck that you're putting together. You should look at it through the lens of, if I gave this to someone and I wasn't there to verbally convey the story, that back to the great storytelling that you need to have, would they get the takeaways from this that I want them to take away? And the reason why that's important here is when you send that deck into your discussion with an analyst or something, almost assuredly it is going to make a round inside the firm. But those partners who are seeing it for the first time, they're not going to have the benefit of you doing the voiceover with it the first time they see your deck. So it is really, really important to, after you think you have your deck, set it aside or give it to someone who has never seen it before, ask them to read it, and then ask them to regurgitate their takeaways back to you and see if it's what you want it to be. Because if it's not what you want it to be, that's going to end up breaking it inside the institutional VC machine as well.
Great. I'm gonna, I think, ask one more question that we most likely have time, and I'm gonna combine two of them. So when you mentioned the piece about being a really good narrative spinner, if you will, where can entrepreneurs go for coaching and guidance on how to become a better storyteller? And B, do you have an example of a really well done story from a founder, nothing too in the weeds, but maybe like an overview of something like that?
Gosh, it's a little tricky there. So there's no great way to learn how to be a good storyteller, unfortunately. I think this is one of those things that you're either, you got it or you don't. The best way to improve the muscle, though, is sort of the practice makes perfect and get the feedback. Other founders are your friend. Other founders are always your friend. Yay StartOut for bringing a lot of folks together who can be great resources on that. You're not just getting together for these like great social purposes. You should use each other as feedback loops. And this doesn't mean you practice in front of everyone as a group. You should have as many one-off practice sessions with different people as possible. And don't just ask for, hey, how was the pitch? What do you think about the company? Should I highlight something better or worse? Ask them, is there something in this story that would have made this like more exciting for you? Like ask about that piece of it too, because that's really, really important. For examples of things.
A/B testing, Alex.
Yeah, it's kind of like A/B testing. That's right. God, I'm trying to think like really good examples of twists. I like to think of the great storytelling frequently as like twists. Like, do you start somewhere and like, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z, and then on the last page, like, oh, and then by the way, we're going to take over the world, and that's normally like a knock your socks off sort of dynamic. There's a great example we love to talk about since we were Uber investors. That believe it or not, Travis early on in pitching Uber was talking about the much bigger vision of Uber, was talking about what UberX could be back when it was still a black car service for rich folks to have a nice SUV. It was this twist and long vision that even though it was still early days and hey, I'm focused right here, but don't worry, like I have so much fuel for where this could be in 10 years that by the way ended up being an obvious reality. That's one that jumps to mind to me. Do you have any good storytelling examples?
What I would add to the first part of the question is that pitching is like playing music, playing an instrument. You got to do your scales and practice the muscle and get really good, know your talking points. And then at the end of the day, what makes an amazing pitcher is the ability to be present with your audience. And again, this is much harder to do when you're on Zoom and people are distracted, right? But your stuff cold, and then you're responding to the moment, and you can pick up like, ooh, Mike like lit up there when I said something about that. So I'm gonna go deeper into that aspect of the pitch. Or Patrick, he didn't react super great to that. So let me see if I
Sorry,
can
Patrick.
find a different way to express what I wanted to express and try that out. So there's this element of like the art and the science, and that there's the science of go do your one-on-one practice. You can get a communications coach. My wife, when she was raising for her seed, was recommended by another friend who raised a really successful seed to talk to a comms coach, and she was really helpful. And I think there are little things that universally people respond well to, so you get the benefits of learning that. But in the end of the day, after all the practice, it's about being able to read the room, being able to be in the moment and connect with people in that moment. So I think that for the first question, like, it takes practice, but there's also an element, to Alex's point, of sometimes that comes a lot more naturally for different people. Stories of pitches that work really well. Narrative demos, like, I want to see the product. Like, it's great to see you talking, but if I can experience it for myself, that is going to be way more powerful than you telling me a story. And the story helps frame that experience, especially when you don't have the product all fleshed out. But the more you can show versus tell, I think the more powerful it is for the person at the end.
That's the only advice you should take from Shark Tank. There's always a demo.
So I know we're out of time, but I want to throw in one more idea for how to improve your pitch, and that is, when you pitch, you're going to get rejected a lot, and in many cases, you won't get any reason at all. Sometimes investors will just say, you're a little too early, or you need more traction. And sometimes that's true. And sometimes it's a way to avoid the real reason, which is there was something in your pitch that really went wrong. So one piece of advice that I have is when you get turned down, ask the investor for kind of brutal honesty. And you can even say it that way. You can say, I want you to be brutally honest with me. It will help me improve my pitch to future investors. You can tell me if there's anything in our materials or in our pitch that could have been a little bit better. And many times the investor will react to that and give you frank reaction, which can be really helpful.
But also, don't try to reconvince the investor, because that never works. I've never heard of it working. It is the biggest turnoff that we get when they're like, let me try to, because there's
got it wrong.
It was like, ooh, no.
Yeah, like I think we've had some more stories of, being frank and giving feedback, and then the other person basically like arguing with us of why
an hour,
why we're wrong.
Like,
yeah, and it just
digging your hole deeper.
All right, it doesn't work for everybody apparently.
Well, you can ask, but just make sure you're in a point where you can actually take the feedback.
That's right.
And then be constructive with it as well. Well, that is all the time that we have. Thank you so much, Aike, Mike, and Alex. This has been fantastic. Again, for those that are interested in learning more about the panelists, check out startout.org. There's a ton of upcoming events if you're curious to learn more about being a founder. The sense of community within StartOut is pretty amazing. If you're looking for an opportunity to practice pitching, or to network, or to figure out if your narrative is good, come to more and more events. It's a really great way to increase your network and hopefully get the bridge to your next fundraise. And with that, again, Patrick Driscoll signing out. Thanks again. Any final words from the panelists?
Stay safe.
Thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.